Good evening. It gives me great pleasure to present to you the graduation event of Season 9 of Anita's Attic. When we began Anita's Attic, we only had one purpose, which was to provide mentorship to writers struggling to find their voice. Over the last 9 seasons, I have seen several writers come into Anita's Attic, and it has been a very gratifying journey for me as well as for them, I hope, because some of them have gone on to finish writing their books, some of them have managed to publish their books, and some of them are, I think, very definitely set on the writing path. It's a journey, and at the beginning of every journey, there is a dilemma of not knowing. There is a dilemma of trying to figure out what is the best way that they would be able to fashion a story. I'm very happy to let you know that I think over the last 9 seasons, several of these writers have managed to get it right, which is why some of them have had their books published and some of them have started work on new pieces of writing, and each one of them is very definitely going to be writing a book sooner, if not later. Season 9 was a very interesting season in terms of several things. First, of course, was that because of the pandemic, we have had to move Season 8 and Season 9 into the online format. Obviously, it was a bit of a challenge, but it also opened up doors in ways that wasn't possible before in the offline format. In Season 9, I had writers from 4 different continents and we were covering 5 time zones. Nevertheless, it flowed seamlessly. Each one of the writers present was very committed to trying to get as much as they could out of this program, and I'm sure you will see that for yourself when they present to you their collaborative fiction titled Voices from the Attic. The graduation event will be followed by the Attic lecture. Last year, again because of the pandemic, we couldn't host the Attic lecture, but this year we decided to move that also into the online format. The Attic lecture will be presented by a very favorite writer of mine, Manoranjan Byapari, whose life story is worthy of a biopic, if not a book. And Meenakshi Thakur, the publisher of Eka, the language imprint of the translation imprint of Westland Books, will introduce Manoranjan Byapari to you, and I hope that you are going to derive great pleasure out of this evening's program. First, the collaborative fiction presented by Anita's Attic, Season 9, titled Voices from the Attic, actually Letters from the Attic, and that will be followed by Manoranjan Byapari's lecture. I look forward to hearing from you on what you thought about the graduation event and Mr. Byapari's lecture. Thank you for being here, and stay on and watch this program.
As Sanjeev Sandhu Hegde looked around the musty cool attic of his parents' home in Bangalore, his eyes raking the leftover junk from decades of his family's life in the city, he saw it, lying below the small window overlooking the street, his appa's trunk. His amma had requested him to go find some old family photo albums that were kept in the trunk. His appa, Balkrishna Hegde, had passed away recently from a massive heart attack, and Sanju had refused to attend the funeral, coming to meet amma a week after the 13-day rituals were over. Sanju wiped the sweat off his forehead with a kerchief, walked to the window, squatted, and using the key his mother had given him, opened the padlock on the trunk. As he threw the lid backwards, a wave of dust rose up to greet him, making him sneeze. The trunk smelled of mothballs, and as he shined the flashlight on the interior, he noticed that objects in the trunk were stacked together untidily, which was unusual, given his appa's OCD for cleanliness. He found the pile of photo albums on one side, but as he made to grab them, his eyes fell on a sheaf of newspaper clippings held together by paper clips. The top one had Sanju receiving an award at a prestigious tech expo in Delhi. Lifting the sheaf and holding it up, he leafed through the clippings and noticed that while most were of him winning other tech awards, two were of him winning the Write India short story competition and the Bodley Head essay contest. His forehead creased. Since when had Appa been appreciative of Sanju's extracurricular achievements? He had resented his Appa all his life for not letting him pursue anything except academic excellence. Now, he was feeling both surprised and doubtful. It was when he was putting back the sheaf that his eyes fell on a bunch of letters held together by a rubber band. What intrigued him was that the first envelope had his name and address as the recipient and his parents' home address as the return address, written in his father's tidy scrawl. Retrieving the letter from the bunch and opening it, he fished out a 1 A4 size page letter, also in his father's handwriting. Sanju sat cross-legged on the floor, repositioned his flashlight and started reading the letter. Dear Sanju, by the time you read this, I will be long gone. I have always been a reticent man, and while a presentiment of my impending death brought about an epiphany, it sadly did not change who I am. I hope it suffices to say that I am sincerely apologetic for everything. I was a terrible father to you. I was always so concerned with imposing my vision on you and making a man out of you that I forgot that I am your father and not your drill sergeant. My father treated me the same way for the same reasons, and it was too late by the time I saw how wrong both of us had been. You may find it hard to believe, but I was proud of you. Until recently, I had no idea that you were a writer. Till your Amma showed me the prizes you won in writing contests in school and college. I was even prouder then. I gave you an adverse, hostile childhood, my son, and you made the best of it. You're a stronger and better man than I ever was, and I will always be proud of you. I tried reaching out to you towards the end, but I completely understand why you didn't respond. Consider this letter my penance, and I hope that one day you will find it in yourself to forgive me. I wish you all the happiness in the world. Yours sincerely, Appa. P.S. If you find someone as strong and good-hearted as your Amma, don't let her go. For a while he sat there, still as a statue, shocked beyond words. His eyes glazed, staring at the letter, the paper crumpling because his fingers held it too tight. Then, holding the letter, he kept it in his shirt pocket and picked up the other letters. The recipients ranged from those living in Hyderabad and Kerala in the south to Jaipur in the north and Kolkata in the east, and one was from Chicago. What were these letters doing in his father's possession? Why had he never delivered them? His Appa had been a postman for many years. Maybe he had noticed that the postage was wrong or the address was incomplete, and that is why his Appa held on to the letters. Had he harbored a secret wish to deliver the letters himself but couldn't owing to time constraints? There was a lot he didn't know about his Appa. Sanju always thought that the distant, harsh authoritarian who had made his childhood a living hell filled with fear and self-doubt was all there was to him. But apparently he was a repentant, proud father when he had died. Sanju felt a stab of guilt tear through his heart. His father had tried to reach out, first directly and then via his Amma. Maybe he should have at least heard the old man out. Maybe the letter was motivated by genuine regret. Sanju wondered if there was anything he could do to assuage the guilt he was feeling. Would delivering the letters by hand and bringing closure to the recipients help? He had been pondering a sabbatical for some time. 22 years of hard work and almost no vacations at the same company had caused the burnout. Sanjeev had no social life, friendships, or a relationship to speak of. So he had wondered what he would do with his break. Well, now he knew. He would put in the application promptly. His cushy position at the company would be secured, and he had sizable savings in the bank and unutilized leaves. Sanjeev gathered the rest of the letters and got up, stretching his legs to get rid of the pins and needles. He would tell his mother of his plan to travel across India and deliver the letters. He needed some time to process things in his mind and some R&R. New places, new people, and new food would probably help the process. Albums forgotten in the trunk. Sanjeev exited the attic through the foldable staircase leading to it, guilt and anticipation playing a tug of war in his mind. He had found a purpose, and maybe, just maybe, closure lay at the end. Thank you.
On Saturday morning, the sun was veiled by a blanket of leaden clouds. It had rained heavily throughout the night. In his hotel room, Sanjeev tugged at the rusted buckle of his father's bag. It was an old khaki postal delivery bag made of rough, matty fabric. Sanjeev found it in the trunk his father had left behind. His father slipped the satchel onto his shoulder every morning when he left for work. As a child, he wished to accompany his father on his bicycle to deliver the letters, but his petitions were always turned down by his father. For the 10th time, Sanjeev checked the bag for the letter. He lived with the fear of forgetting things. He once went to an exam without his hall ticket and faced his father's wrath. So ever since, he made sure he had everything he needed before he stepped out. Only one letter had to be delivered in this unfamiliar city, Hyderabad. He hired an auto driver and gave the driver the address. As they made their way through an alley replete with potholes full of muddy water from the night rain, the three-wheeler hopped up and down. The decorative hangings on the rearview mirror swayed from side to side, and Sanjeev's mind wavered. The words inside the letter, rendered inaccessible to him by the old adhesive that sealed it, could be entirely frivolous or extremely important to the recipient. The latter would undoubtedly infuriate the receiver, having been deprived of a crucial and possibly life-altering piece of information for so long. Was he doing right by opening another man's past wounds to find closure in his own life? Sanjeev wondered. For a moment, he was tempted to read the letter in his bag, but decided against committing the transgression. Sir, this is the area. Where do you want to go from here? The driver asked as he drove. It says house number 12-7-23/9, opposite Hanuman temple. Sanjeev took out the letter from the bag on his lap. Bhai Sahab, where is the Hanuman Mandir here? The auto driver peeped out of the auto and shouted at nobody in particular. Go straight and take a right, somebody hollered back. The driver left him at the temple, which, as indicated by the address and to Sanjeev's relief, was still present. But instead of a house opposite the temple, he was greeted by a high-rise apartment. He wondered if there was another Hanuman temple nearby. He hesitated. Sanjeev found it difficult to approach people and talk to them, even if it was to merely ask for directions. He looked around and saw tall buildings everywhere. At last, he came across an old one-storied house on the street corner, sandwiched between two dominating bungalows. The number 1988 was cemented to the front wall, as had been the trend a few decades ago of displaying the year of construction of their homes on the facade. The house had been constructed close to 30 years ago, right around the time the letter was written. He approached the house and knocked on the gate. There was no answer. Post, he shouted. Wasn't that how a postman introduced himself back in the day? But his faint voice was drowned by the noise of the traffic. He was not used to speaking loudly. Whenever Sanjeev found the need to raise his voice, he wished he were bold and assertive rather than shy and anxious. Boys learn to be men from their fathers, which he never could. And at 44, timidity was an invariable part of his character. Post, he shouted once again, trying to raise his voice louder. A young man came out of the house. Sanjeev inquired about the man on the letter who lived in that street 30 years ago. A letter late by 30 years? He said, flipping it to read the address. Did your time machine malfunction? He asked, looking up at Sanjeev, grinning. Press the wrong button. Sanjeev smiled with a slight shrug. I'm only 23. Let me check with my dad. Please wait. He carried the letter inside and a few moments later came back with his father, who seemed to be in his 50s. You have come to deliver a letter after 30 years? The man also asked. I vaguely remember this person. He lived in the house opposite the mandir, he said, raising his hand and pointing a finger at the temple. I remember him because we played card games together in the evening. I don't recall what he did nor where he worked. He left this place a long time ago and the house was demolished almost 10 years ago. Is there another Hanuman Mandir here? No. There is only one temple and this is the street mentioned in the address. There was nothing more to be done. Sanjeev thanked them, took back his letter and made his way to the main road to catch an auto back to the hotel. As he walked up the sludgy lane, the letter slipped from his hand. It glided in the air for a moment and landed in a pothole. And before Sanjeev could reach it, a bike sped through, soaking the letter deep in the mucky water. He picked it up and saw the 30-year-old ink washing away. In a few moments, the contents of the letter would be forgotten forever. Notwithstanding the ungracious nature of his act, Sanjeev made a split-second decision to save the words from fading away. He opened the soggy private inland carefully, held it between his soiled fingers, and read the letter written in English. Dear Mr. Ashok, I am writing to you once again to inform you of your mother's condition. Unfortunately, I am afraid this time I have to bear some bad news. Your mother left this world on the 20th of May. She suffered a second stroke in the morning, just as the doctors had predicted would happen given her pre-existing heart condition. Since I am the immediate neighbor, the maid working for your mother notified me of the situation early in the morning. When I reached your house, Dr. Ramesh and a nurse were already attending to your mother. She complained of pain in her leg and back and could not lay still on the bed. So the doctor administered a painkiller. Later, the doctor briefed me that they put her on palliative care as there was nothing more to be done and she would not survive the night. I immediately informed the other neighbors. As they waited on her, I rushed to the post office and sent you a telegram. But unfortunately, I do not know if you received it. I wonder if your mother has the correct address because I have been writing to you for a few weeks now and have not received a response yet. I informed your mother that you had received my telegram and you responded that you are on your way home. I of course lied to her. She gradually lost consciousness by noon and passed away at 5:15 p.m. peacefully. As we had no knowledge of the relatives' whereabouts, all the neighbors collectively bore the expenses and performed the last rites together in accordance with her caste tradition. The landowner has occupied the house. There was nothing of value in the place, although I have packed her belongings and stored them in my warehouse should you want them. Moreover, I am in possession of the death certificate issued by the doctor. I have also collected her ashes and kept the urn safely in my house. I will keep it with me for 6 months in the hope that you will come back and immerse the ashes in the river yourself. Your mother spent her last days in relative peace despite her deteriorating health, although she often worried about being alone. She would spend her evenings on the veranda chatting with a neighbor who passed by. The conversations often revolved around you. You were in her mind till her last moment. I look forward to hearing from you soon. Sincerely, Pawan. A slight jerk of his hand and the dripping wet paper, heavy with muddy water, began to tear. Sanjeev tossed it away. There was no saving the words in that wet dispatch, except in his mind, where they lingered, transforming into pity for the old woman who had died alone, longing for her son. The letter could have been addressed to Sanjeev himself. He too was willfully absent when the old man died. Yet, oddly, on this day, he didn't experience remorse, only pity. His father had carelessly placed a heavy burden on his shoulders when he asked for Sanjeev's forgiveness. Somewhere, Sanjeev would have to learn to forgive himself too. Thank you.
Sanjeev's sabbatical from work had kept him away from his laptop. It had been a while since he received an email that didn't instantly flash promotions of the autumn sale or Pizza Hut offering three pizzas for the price of one. He only made an effort to connect online with people he truly cared for. His mother was one of them, although the calls were scarce. He was reeling inside each time he thought of his rendezvous with Ashok. For weeks after, he found it difficult to gather the enthusiasm to go on with the rest of the letters. Just one more, and I'll see if it's too much to take, he told himself. The beige envelope had a rectangular postal stamp that was dark green. There were white wings, coconut trees, and the dome of the city hall painted on it. It was worth 2 rupees and read Établissement Français en Land. Sanjeev gazed at the envelope and wondered how his father could have procured this letter, having been an infant when World War II ended. It was too late to have his questions answered. The sender was Julien Mercier, Pondicherry, French India, and the letter was addressed to Simone de Chari, 2 Rue Baste, Paris. It was dated 5th September 1945. Ration cards, letters, and war photos were among the items that attracted antique lovers to these auctions. He felt a tad relieved that his father didn't steal this one. He gazed up and looked at the ceiling with a wry smile. A millisecond later, it disappeared when he realized the recipient was probably dead, and perhaps the sender, Julia, too. Sanjeev sat on his desk, dusted off his laptop, and Googled Simone Dashari, Paris. He clicked on the first result and found more than 80 Simone Dasharis. Which one is mine? He wondered. He finally found a Simone with two addresses. One of them was 2 Rue Baste, Paris. By now, he had smoked 4 cigarettes. He never smoked on his desk, but the thrill of finding someone across the world kept his attention alight. After digging through Simone's family records, Sanjeev found that she was later known as Simone Lacoste. He logged in to his shadow account on Facebook and looked for Simone's daughter, Louise Lacoste Calvert. Sanjeev was reticent, especially on social media. He lost out on making friends and lovers because his fingers froze as soon as he typed period. There were many unsent messages, yet this time he mustered the courage. He hit the send button. If only he had found this courage 7 years ago, he wouldn't have lost out on the only woman he had fallen madly in love with. He remembered the day Divya waited for his answer as she left the note under his door. Consumed by rage over a minute disagreement, Sanjeev failed to hold on to the one true love of his life. It was 1:30, and sleepless night turned into one with a purpose. He received a message. Bonjour. If you're not a spammer, please message the name of the person who wrote the letter. Sanjeev understood the caution and sent 4 words. Julia Simone, letter 1945. He immediately received a phone number and an email address. Looking forward to seeing the scanned letter, it said, and was signed by Louise Lacoste Calvert, daughter of Simone Dashari Lacoste. Do not hesitate to read it. You must know how important this letter is, Louise. His heart was beating faster as he carefully opened the letter. Ma chérie, Simi, I'm alive. Saved by the forces from Tunis, I now live in French India. Sending a ticket for Madras Almanac. Stops by Normandy, waiting to fulfill our promise of marriage. See you at Madras port. With love, Jules. Written scarcely, Julien's promise to marry Simone, the love of his life, warmed Sanjeev's heart. I wish Simone got this letter. I hope she's alive. A wave of emotions was true. He scanned the letter and sent an email to Louise. The next morning, he woke up at 10 a.m. His phone replaced his coffee as he rushed to check if he had received an email from Louise. He had one unread email. I'm a happy person today, and so is my mother's soul. She was heartbroken when she read Julien's obituary in the newspaper. She kept his letters. His roses are now dry and have left a red tint in her books. She was a great mother and wife, but never a good lover. She told me that her heart was long taken. I wish she were alive to know that he waited for her. I wish for many things, but I hope you can find Julien if he's alive. If you do, tell him he was and remained Simone's soulmate. I will send you a trunk of letters that you may have to deliver to his family. My mother wrote to Julien for years after, having known that he would never read them. Simone's death was not a surprise, yet Sanjeev felt downhearted. He returned to his laptop to find Julien's family. He didn't find one and called the French consulate in Puducherry. He left his number and email for any information that could lead him to Julien's family or graveyard. An hour later, an email popped in with an address for an old age home. Julien was alive. After exchanging details of his findings with a tearful Louise, Sanjeev waited with a bated breath for her courier. 72 hours and 40 cigarettes later, the parcel arrived. He didn't want to waste a minute more. After all, this delivery was long overdue. He packed hastily and rushed to the train station. Anna, drive me to 15 Rue Gregoire, please, he said to the auto driver outside the Puducherry station. Yes, bienvenue, vanakkam, said the driver. 20 minutes later, they arrived at the Christ Living Trust home and its huge blue door set in a yellow frame. It was nothing like he had seen before. He opened the door and found himself in the reception area. Ma'am, I called you last night. I'm Sanjeev, and I have a delivery for Julien Mercier, he stated. Ah, yes, please have a seat. I will wheel him here, the lady responded. 6 minutes of wait felt like an eternity. He stood there more than a dozen times, peeped across the corridor. The caretaker slowly wheeled Julien towards the sitting area. He looked calm, as if he knew what he was going to discover in Simone's little trunk of letters. As the wheels came to a pause, Sanjeev introduced himself. Bonjour, Mr. Messier. My name is Sanjeev, and I have some answers to questions that you may have. Julien smiled. I stopped asking questions almost 60 years ago, but I have always looked forward to receiving gifts. They both laughed as if it was the best joke they had heard in a long time. Sanjeev handed over the small trunk to him. Julien looked and unhooked the metal string and opened the wooden trunk. While he was still looking inside, he lifted his eyes and glanced at Sanjeev. Eyes moist, curved lips, and relieved heart. The silence in the air was a testament of a long lived promise. Simone is dead? Yes, she passed away 5 years ago, Sanjeev said. Julien slowly went through the letters, and tears streamed down his face. He felt his throat closing up. She loved me, always. She never broke her promise. I'm a happy man, Julien shook as he said these words. Thank you. Thank you for answering all the questions I asked myself for years as I waited for Simone at Madras port. My poor little Sherry, she always loved. Sanjeev knelt down and hesitated to hold Julia's hands. He then walked by the beach road, and his heart was filled with remorse as he remembered the silence that broke him apart from the true love of his life. I will never let another promise of love go unfulfilled, he said, as he decided to go ahead with his journey.
Sanjeev sat by the window of the restaurant, taking in the busy street, Kozhikode through the glass blurred by raindrops. He took a sip of the Suleimani tea that was on the table, inhaling the magical flavor as the spices brewed in. Kozhikode was just as stunning as he had imagined. Patches of lush green spread across the busy streets captivated him. Sanjeev placed the cup down and opened his bag to take out a letter. He glanced at the address on it and peeked through the glass window. He set his eyes on the house painted in white just opposite the restaurant. The auto rickshaw driver who had dropped him there had shown him that house when he had inquired about the address. The enchanting aroma of tasty dishes of Malabar that emanated from the restaurant kitchen lured him to sit there for a while longer. Perhaps I'll eat something nice for lunch after I deliver this letter, he promised himself and rose. Sanjeev once again confirmed the address with the man at the billing counter. This house itself, sir, he said with a warm smile, pointing at the white colored house. Sanjeev walked out and hastily crossed the road. The drizzle left wet patches on his white shirt. When he reached the gate of the house, he saw an obituary poster stuck on the wall. Call to glory, the poster said, with a picture of a man with streaks of grey in his hair. The name Matthew Thomas was printed in bold under the picture. Sanjeev wondered whether it was a bad time to deliver the letter. The Raider's funeral had been 5 weeks ago, though, according to the poster. A familiar sense of uneasiness rose in him. As he stood in front of the gate, undecided whether to go in or not, he heard a soft voice from behind which said, "May I help you?" Sanjeev turned back and found a woman in her mid-30s. She was getting down from her scooter to open the gate. She removed her helmet and straightened her hair. The white churidar she was wearing, with black checkered patterns on them, billowed in the light breeze. Although her eyes seemed stern, her smile had a welcoming warmth that he had noticed in many people at Kozhikode. Sanjeev momentarily glanced at the address on the letter, to Lily Matthew. Would she be Lily? He pondered. I have a letter to deliver here, to Lily Matthew, Sanjeev said, not knowing what else to say. Oh, I am Lily Matthew. A letter to me? Let me have a look. It's a letter dated 2002. It's from Mr. K.V. Thomas, Sanjeev said as he handed over the letter. Lily gave a puzzled look. How? She exclaimed. Sanjeev noticed before tears there needs to be puzzlement. Lily opened the gate hurriedly and welcomed Sanjeev in. Whilst she parked the vehicle in the large car porch, Sanjeev explained how he had found the letter and the reason behind his journey. Lily looked a bit disoriented. She hastily tore open the envelope and began reading the letter. Sanjeev noticed her eyes shifting left and right, scanning every word on paper. Her rhythmic eye movements paved the way for tears to stream down her cheeks. Sanjeev stood there silently, waiting for Lily to say something, not knowing if it was embarrassment or concern he felt for her. When she finished reading the letter, she kissed it and held it close to her chest. Thank you so much for finding me and delivering this letter. It means a lot to me, said Lily with a faint smile, wiping her wet cheeks. Upon realizing that both of them were still standing at the car porch, Lily invited Sanjeev indoors. She offered to make him a cup of tea. Sanjeev tried politely declining, but Lily insisted. You can't visit a home in Kozhikode without at least having tea from there, Lily said. That warm smile Sanjeev had noticed earlier reappeared. It's a letter from my grandfather, my Valyapachan, Lily said as she brought Sanjeev the tea that she had hastily made for him. The tea had milk and cardamom this time. As Sanjeev sipped the tea, Lily stared out through the window, her eyes lingering on the periwinkle flowers by the fence. They seemed like little splashes of lavender paint against the canvas of the white-colored wooden fence. The petals wobbled and the leaves danced as drops of rain fell on them. Lily gasped, trying to hold back tears when faded memories began floating on her mind. She remembered being a little girl, sitting on Valyapachan's shoulders, trying to catch butterflies that floated around the flowers in the garden. She felt a stab in her heart. When Sanjeev had taken in a few sips of the tea, Lily broke the silence and said, I wish my daddy was here to read this letter from Valyapachan. It would have made such a difference. Her voice was heavy with grief. My daddy, he passed away a few weeks ago, Lily continued. I'm so sorry, my heartfelt condolences. Sanjeev struggled to find words. March 2002. Valyapachan must have written this letter a few months after his release from the jail at Bangalore, Lily said, as though connecting dots. Why was he in jail? Sanjeev asked curiously. He immediately regretted asking such a question. Lily didn't seem to mind. I don't know, to be honest. I was only 7 years old when he got arrested. I never tried to find out even after I grew up, never wanted to. To me, he was always my grandfather who loved me dearly. I only have fond memories of him. I cried a lot when I heard that the police arrested him. I learned from Daddy recently that Valyapachan had some kind of illegal business in Bangalore. Sanjeev slowly slipped into deep thought. Memories of his grandfather began flooding his mind. A man of rigid ways whom Appa always seemed to be appeasing. Appa had desperately strived to be just like his father. He had always carried himself the way his father did, spoke the same way. Was Appa just trying to get his father's approval? Sanjeev pondered. He wondered how it would have felt to have a loving grandfather. Unlike Lily, who seemed to have fond memories of her grandfather, he couldn't recall having any meaningful moments with his grandfather, viewing him only as a mirror image of Appa and his hard-hearted ways. Daddy used to say that I'm the only human being Valyapachan ever cared for, his little princess granddaughter. Valyapachan and Daddy never had a healthy father-son relationship. Daddy used to say, Valyapachan is a greedy criminal who only cared about money, money and only money. But for some odd reason, Daddy never stopped Valyapachan from visiting me here in Kozhikode when I was little, until he went to jail. Lily continued. Sanjeev looked at Lily with wide open eyes, eager to know what had happened. Valyapachan tried to contact us once he was released from jail, seeking acceptance from his son, I suppose. I must have been around 16 or 17 in 2002 when he was released, still young to fully understand what had happened. Daddy hung up whenever Valyapachan called. He threw away all the letters Valyapachan wrote to him without even opening them. Valyapachan wasn't brave enough to visit us here in Kozhikode after his time in jail. Maybe if this letter addressed to me had been received then, Daddy would have let me read it. Daddy wouldn't deny me or Valyapachan that, I'm sure. If only Daddy had read the words Valyapachan had to say, the words that I just read, an old man seeking his family's forgiveness, hoping for a fresh start. Lily's voice broke. It was in 2002 itself, I remember, that we learned the news of Valyapachan's passing away. Daddy took me to his funeral. I saw Daddy crying that day. Lily finished with a gasp. She seemed to have a sense of relief in sharing a story that she had been holding inside for years. Lily then looked to the sky, smiling. I hope Valyapachan and Daddy are together in heaven now, happy and reconciled, she sighed. There was a silence for a few moments. As Sanjeev finished the tea and placed the cup on the teapot, his eyes accidentally caught on the last two words of the letter, which Lily had kept down. Forgive me. Sanjeev felt an ache grow in his heart.
It was Sanjeev's first time in Palakkad. There was something about these journeys that had begun growing on him. The uncertainty that came with reaching a place where everything was unfamiliar was addictive. The journey that he had undertaken on a whim had now grown wings and was becoming increasingly all-consuming. Even so, as the train now pulled into his fourth stop, he enthusiastically gathered his overnight bag from underneath the seat and sat ready for yet another rendezvous. The smell of hot coconut oil hung heavy in the air. He twiddled a Marlboro between his fingers. It had been 8 hours, a long time to go without a smoke. The last few days had pushed him well towards becoming a chain smoker. Huge signs all over the station reminded him that public smoking was not just frowned upon, but banned and dealt with seriously. A fellow smoker shared his misery. Such a nanny state. Sanjeev walked up to the auto rickshaw stand outside the station and held out a piece of paper. Savitri Vilasam, behind Moksha Shiva Temple, Pulapata. The driver smiled a full smile. My place, sir, my place. In Malayalam-laced English, Unni incessantly asked questions, all seemingly straightforward, but Sanjeev had realized over the last few days that nothing was simple. Nothing was single-dimensional, and there was absolutely no truth in a yes or no answer to any question. Unni's questions continued. Sanjeev answered most of them with a nod or a smile. He intently ignored one particular question about why he was traveling this far from Bangalore. There was no point. Unni wouldn't understand. Unni peeked at his passenger in the rearview mirror, but sensed his reluctance and let the question slide. Like a pregnant woman cradling her baby bump, Sanjeev kept running his hands over the top of his overnight bag that held a letter for Krishna Nair. These letters were meant to reach their destinations decades ago. By hand delivering these to the right recipients now, after all these years, he was single-handedly resurrecting dead emotions, relationships, hopes, and dreams. This was the fourth such letter. He was playing God, while his fingers still nursed a Marlboro dream. That he was a lesser God with an eager eye on absolving himself of any guilt by putting himself through this journey was no one's business but his. Everything in Kerala had a freshly washed look, he thought. Bright green grass blades, flowers with unapologetically bright colours, and squeaky clean clay roof tiles of houses. He was impressed with himself, noticing mundane things only a seasoned traveller would. He imagined himself with a camera crew. These journeys were only the beginning. Now that he was free from the shackles of 9 to 5, albeit temporarily, who knew where this could lead? He was shaken out of his thought thread when the rickshaw jerked to a stop in front of a traditional Kerala house. Vijayan Cheta, Unni called loudly in the direction of the house. A tall man in a crisp white dhoti walked towards the gate. Ara, Unni gestured for Sanjeev to take over. I'm here to see Mr. Krishna Nair. I've come from Bangalore and I have something for him. Vijayan's smile faded. He waved a quick goodbye to Unni and opened the gate for Sanjeev. Please come in. Just as Sanjeev settled into a bamboo chair on the porch, Vijayan shared in a quiet voice. Krishna Nair was my father. He passed away a couple of years ago. His eyes glistened. I'm so sorry about your father. I have something that was meant for him. Would you like to see it? A sad smile returned to Vijayan's face. He asked Sanjeev to follow him into the house. Once in the living room, Vijayan pointed to a framed photo on the wall. Achan. He beamed proudly. My father, he translated for Sanjeev's benefit. He was the go-to person in the village for anything and everything. Filling out application forms for villagers, talking to banks on their behalf. All this over and above his day job as the chief administrator of the temple board. He was my hero. Still is, you know. A beautiful oil lamp stayed lit in front of that framed photo. Sanjeev begrudged people who were able to share nauseatingly happy memories of their parents. This time and every time, Sanjeev drew a blank as he tried to summon up some about his dad or his childhood. Sanjeev handed the envelope to Vijay. A letter meant for your dad, postmarked 3 decades ago, found its way to me through my dad. It's now yours, if you want it. Sanjeev stole his gaze away from Vijayan to avoid any further deliberation. Vijayan paced up and down the long veranda, struggling to compose himself. I'll see you later? Sanjeev stood up tentatively. No, please stay for tea and a quick breakfast. You've come a long way. Vijayan stopped short of a smile. Can you spend a few more minutes with me and wait while I read the letter? Vijayan's frame looked a lot frailer than when Sanjeev first saw him. Sanjeev sank back in his chair, even as he wondered what the letter would reveal. Dear Krishnan, this is my final attempt to reach you. I have tried to write to you at your home address, but with no reply. I have also written to your office address to no avail. I know where you live, but you should know that I cannot show up at Pulapta any time in the near future. People don't forget. Gods don't either. When we hatched the plan last year, the gentleman's agreement was the 3 of us go our separate ways, and you contact me once the mayhem has died down. I had no reason to doubt you. I still don't, strangely. Now that I think about it, I wonder if I've been a fool all along. Of the 3 of us, I took the most risk and trusted you completely with the payout. Balu must have handed the cash to you after he took his cut, so he got a share and skipped town. I had to leave the town overnight, labeled an unscrupulous temple thief. Not even my wife believes me when I tell her that you planned the whole thing. I hope you have an honest reason for not being able to get in touch with me so far. I don't have a job here, so earn my living doing odd jobs for people around. I have not been able to get my son a place in school and so he has missed out on a few months of education now. You know, he's the same age as Vijay. I know I'm digressing, but I am curious to know whether your family ever questioned the sudden wealth you came into. Did Savitri or Vijayan ask, or did they just simply accept the convenient change to their lifestyle? Not that any of this matters to me now. We lived like a family. How could you do this to me? I don't have a permanent address now, but below I leave a phone number of a local electronic shop. You can leave me a message there and I will call you right back. Hope you're healthy and happy, my friend. I hope to God that this is just a delay in your response and not because you have intentionally decided to call me out of my life. Kunyuti. A covenant had been broken between friends, between a father and son. If he could, Sanjeev would pick up the shards of Vijayan's fallen face. He would like to have told Vijayan that all fathers were like this, some more blatant about their misgivings than others. Kunyuti was a thief. He could have lied about my father, no? Vijayan asked, desperately clinging on to a possibility that would leave his father's image in his head intact. As Sanjeev closed the gate behind him, he took stock of the havoc he had wreaked. His act had mercilessly crushed a lifetime of devotion. He had played God all right. He tore up his plans of spending another night in this town where he had unleashed hell. Leaving Palakkad tonight, he texted his mum.
The train from Palakkad reached Alleppey early in the morning. Sanjeev had taken a room in a small lodge by the beach. He could see the remains of the old bridge from the window of his room, but was too tired to go for a walk. After a quick nap and a bath, he took an auto to the address on the letter. The place was not hard to find. Sanjeev paused at the gate for a moment. He felt as though he had stepped back in time. The house was sprawling, painted a dull yellow with the main door and windows etched out in white. In fact, there were so many windows that it felt as though someone had built the windows first and filled the spaces in between with bricks. The main door was huge, a 4-paneled one, unlike the boring single-framed ones he was used to. He was slightly unsure as he rang the bell. A stately face with hair as curly and white as clouds opened one of the top panels and asked, "Yes?" "Does Renu Joseph live here?" he asked gingerly. "Renu Joseph doesn't live here, but you're in luck. She's here today." Her face broke into a welcoming smile as she replied in English. "Come in," she said, and opened the lower panel of the door. "You're so thin, I don't have to open it completely." He couldn't help but laugh at that. "I have a letter for her from one Rakhi Joseph," he said as he sat down on the plush off-white cushion on an old-fashioned settee. Everything about the place had an old-world charm. Portraits of a majestic old man with some sort of decoration on his shoulder, and a regal-looking middle-aged lady. Heads of a bison and antler, all mounted on stark white walls. Furniture made of teak and rosewood. Not to mention the lady who was staring at him now with an incredulous look on her face. "What did you say?" she whispered. She placed her hands on the sides of the chair to steady herself. "My father was a postman. He passed away a year ago. I found a bunch of undelivered letters in his trunk. This is one of them," he said hastily as he handed the blue England letter to her. The edges were slightly frayed, and the blue was slowly turning into white. But the writing was very clear. Small cursive letters slightly slanting to the right. He was fascinated by the handwriting right from the beginning. It was almost like calligraphy. Her hands were shaking as she held the letter, and her voice was breaking as she called out, "Rekha, Reena, Punu, call Renu. Someone is here with a letter from Rakhi." "What?" A few voices chorused in unison from around the house, and its owners appeared one after another. "I'm not running a women's hostel," said the lady with a smile. "These are my nieces and are visiting after a long time. Many of my nieces and nephews lived with me during their school and college days. All of them are here today, except Raki. Her voice dropped. Who's it, Auntie? A woman came in rubbing her eyes. Her short hair was in total disarray, and she must have noticed the look on his face. Hi, I'm Renu. She was the one whom you couldn't mess around with. Sanjeev thought at her firm grip. Jet lagged, and my hair has a life of its own. Please excuse the trampish look. There was a twinkle in her eyes. She has a softer side too, Sanjeev thought. The aunt gently handed over the letter to Renu. She froze. Then she took the letter. As though she didn't trust her legs, Renu sank into an old recliner. Two of the others perched on the handles on either side of her, while the rest looked down at the letter from behind. They fit into each other perfectly, each one a piece of a beautiful tapestry. Their warmth was contagious. A strange sense of belonging he had seldom felt in his life and had always longed for was seeping into him. 17th April 1996, she read out loud. The day we went to see her, said the aunt. She left us on the 19th, she sighed. Dearest Renu Chechi. The others snorted as Renu started reading the letter. It's an inside joke. We used to call this one Chechi when we were young, then decided she doesn't deserve the title. One of the younger ones poked at Renu's head lovingly. Don't think I didn't notice the look on your face as you left the room. I could feel the tremor in your fingers as you were brushing my hair. And yes, I did see the shock and pain in your eyes when you saw the blood that I had spat out. My time is up, I know. Does it hurt me? Am I ready to go? The honest answer would be a resounding no. There are so many things I want to do, so many places I've wanted to visit. But the dear Lord misses me too much. I will be called back soon. As short as it would be, it was still a full life. The best set of siblings and some great friends. What more could I have asked for? Let me admit something to you. Don't tell anyone else, okay? Yes, I was a little in love with Rajiv. Poor chap, he had a narrow escape from me. Ha ha. Did you see the look Dr. Arvind gave me? I think he's a little in love with me. Wink, wink. Another one that is escaping me. Sigh. Take care of Mummy, okay? There are no goodbyes. I will be back as a ghost and haunt you forever. Your darling sister, Raki. P.S. Your jokes fall flat when you try to hide your tears. Be careful. Wink again. All of them were sobbing by now. The second one, Rekha, just sat down on the floor and started keening. The others held her gently until she regained her composure. I will never forget the look on her face that day, Renu said, as if she had lost all hope. She didn't talk much that day. Our little one that we had to bribe to keep her mouth shut otherwise. What happened to her? She had a congenital heart problem. There were some complications post the surgery that she had to have. And then she was gone, just like that. And what happened to Rajiv? Our sister was too proud to let anyone know of her illness. She didn't want anyone's sympathy. Rajiv went abroad after they graduated. She was a little disappointed that he didn't even try to find out where she was. Both of them were stubborn. Did he get to know later? In fact, he found me through FB a couple of years ago. He did mention some of their common friends had informed him. He was too distraught and didn't know how or what to tell us. So he just let it be, said Renu. He has never forgotten her. We waste so many beautiful moments in our life just because we assume the other is at fault. If only one of them had reached out. Happens to all of us, doesn't it? Said the aunt with a faraway look in her eyes. Sanjeev was shaking inside. All he could think of at that moment was of Amrita, his classmate in engineering. She too had just disappeared after their final exams. Maybe I could try and find her, just to see her once more, he thought.
There are always two sides to a story, and he had never bothered to consider his father's version. Sanjeev thought as the cab drove towards the gate. The guard at the gate questioned him. What is the purpose of your visit, Sanjeev ji? Looking out of his car window, Sanjeev exhaled irritatingly. My father nicked a handful of letters through his career, and now that he's dead, he's put me in charge of clearing his moral debt. As tempting as this response was, Sanjeev resisted being acerbic to the guard. Bottling up all the anger, he settled for personal business. The guard dialed the house of Prakash Vallamsetti, and when the phone was passed on to Sanjeev, he wasn't sure if he would be allowed passage. Hello, Mr. Prakash. I have a letter from Venugopal Iyer written to you in 1997. I wanted to pass this on to you and explain why it has remained undelivered all these years. Sanjeev heard a heavy sigh from the other end of the line. A long pause followed that ended with the words "OK," which he took as a sign of approval. The phone exchanged hands and the guard nodded to Sanjeev before proceeding to open the gates, allowing him entry into one of the best management colleges of the country. He messaged Amma, at I am Indore now. What a sprawling campus. The dome of a beige building on the hillock glinted as it reflected a ray of sunshine streaming through the grey monsoon clouds. The beauty of the vast campus was overshadowed by the recollection of an argument with his father. Why can't you just do an MBA when I ask you to? Because you want me to do an MBA. It was one of the first times Sanjeev had stood up to his father, pointing fingers at him during a heated debate, one that was halted by his mother, dragging him away, begging to stop. He had always been amazed at her strength, a frail woman who was the thread that held father and son together. As the cab swerved around the magnificent structure, breaking Sanjeev's reverie, he twirled the pack of Marlboro cigarettes in his hands restlessly. The driver halted in front of the faculty quarters that read Prakash Vallamsetti, D23. Breathing out heavily, Sanjeev stepped out, gripping the letter in his hands. The doorbell was answered by a man in his late 50s, slivers of grey streaming through his receding hairline, his face dominated by a large mole at the side of his forehead. Mr. Prakash, I have a letter. Oh, come in. Prakash waved to indicate that Sanjeev should sit on the sofa and studied him with his piercing gaze. An awkward silence stretched uncomfortably that ceased when Sanjeev extracted the letter from his bag and offered it to Prakash. My father had a few undelivered letters during his service as a postman, and this was one of them. I came in possession of them after his death. I wanted to ensure they are delivered to their rightful recipients. I sincerely apologize on behalf of my father. Prakash looked on curiously, wondering why people often blurted out confessions in the presence of a teacher. But then he stared at the letter in his hands and willed it to burn into ashes. Yet the letter had existed as it had done for the last 22 years. He tore it open carelessly, a look of disgust and derision fixed on his face. He read through it quickly, often raising his eyebrows. Prakash finished perusing the letter and put it down next to him. After all these years, it's good to hear an apology from the old man. When he took on the task of delivering the letters, Sanjeev hadn't been prepared for tears and tales that the letter seemed to let loose. But now he knew better, and so he waited patiently for the story to unwind. My father-in-law wasn't happy when I chose to teach in a management institute rather than take over the family business. By allowing his only daughter to marry out of caste, he thought he had earned my allegiance. But I chose to come to Indore when a new IIM was started here. He always resented me and made fun of the fact that I could teach someone to manage their business. It can't be found in a textbook, he ridiculed me, often in front of my extended family. When this job presented itself to me, Taking over the family business wasn't my only option. But he held a grudge ever since. He stopped talking to me. I heard about his deteriorating health through my wife, but I wasn't interested in anything about him anymore. And it stayed that way until you came along. Had this letter been delivered on time, do you think it would have changed your mind? Venugopal Iyer wanted me to bury the hatchet and take over his business in Bangalore. He tried requesting instead of commanding, as had been his usual way. Nevertheless, this letter could not have changed my mind in 1997. Prakash picked up the letter and, with a slight flick of his wrist, let the paper fall into the dustbin. Looking steadily in Sanjeev's direction, Prakash asked in a manner that only teachers are capable of, "Why are you doing this? You could have posted these letters. What's in it for you to deliver them?" Sanjeev gazed at the floor for a while and said, "I had a strained relationship with my father. In his final days, he wrote me an apology too. Maybe he thought that that would absolve him. I really wish I could sort it out with him face to face. But that's no longer possible. Perhaps he will be less of a stranger to me when I know how far I can go for him." Prakash closed his eyes with his fingers for a moment and continued. "I'd forgiven my father in law long before he had written this letter. I was doing what I loved, teaching about something so elusive that many have failed in the past. And I'm proud of what my students have achieved in the real world. People tend to think the best opportunity to apologize is when you're on your deathbed. They've lived their life, made many mistakes, and want to float away by unburdening their conscience from the sins of a lifetime. Perhaps the scriptures preach it as a means of salvation. But do you want the truth? It's the ones who are left behind in this world who need forgiveness more than those who are ready to depart. Because we have to carry on with the rest of our mortal lives." Sanjeev smiled to himself when he realized that journeying for these letters was the only way he could move on.
5 stars. Sanjeev was in great discomfort. Being crammed into a state run bus for 12 hours was no joke. Flexing one's limbs in the correct angle to find comfort between seats that didn't push back and luggage that was stored into every inch of unclaimed space required a special kind of flexibility he clearly lacked. He cursed himself for not buying tickets on a sleeper instead. By the time the bus from Indore reached Jaipur, Sanjeev felt like a gymnast with a back pain instead of a leotard. He tried to shake his feet awake, twisting his ankles this way and that before finally standing up. He zipped up his jacket and alighted from the bus at Nehru Bazaar. Jaipur was colder than he had expected. It was almost 5:30 a.m. The sun seemed to rise languidly. Its rays brightened the narrow streets, the hawkers, and the rows of matchbox-like shops, one after another, like dominoes, but did nothing to warm him. His hands were as cold as ice. He headed towards the nearest tapri to warm himself with chai and get directions to the Sri Hindu Anatha Ashram. In the last few months on the road, he had found a comforting familiarity in roadside chai shops. Akin to the scenes children drew in art competitions, it consisted of the same few things. A huddle of frequent visitors, locals, friends perhaps, who gathered to discuss politics with passion over multiple cups of tea. The tea maker churned a big pot of the golden elixir over a low flame. The warm smell of tea permeated the air. Small children stood in line with flasks, ready to take away the morning chai for shop owners and workers. Passers-by stopped for a bite, impatient to energize themselves for what lay ahead. He fit right in, always. No one bothered him or tried to have a conversation. He was just another person, drowning his personal dilemmas in a cup. He ordered a special and sat down on a weathered bench in front of the stall. He opened his overnight bag and took out the letter he was here to deliver. In his hands, it felt unusually heavy. The envelope was moldy. It was the "Please return to" address on the bottom right that bothered him. His father's curt, non-cursive, business-like handwriting made this personal. Although he wanted to rip it open, he had seen firsthand the turmoil undelivered letters could bring, and was not sure if he could handle this by himself. Why would his father write to an orphanage and never post the letter? The thought only confirmed the fear he had nursed for years. Was he adopted? No wonder he was nothing like his father. He had always felt like an outcast, watching in from the outside. He took a loud sip of the glass tumbler and opened his pack of cigarettes to light up the last Marlboro. A sip and a sharp inhale must compensate for the courage he lacked. On the chaiwala's advice, he took a toto, a motorized rickshaw, to the address Google showed him. The place had 65 five-star reviews. On what basis does one really rate an orphanage, he wondered? The rate at which they shunted children into respectable homes, or the warmth with which abandoned children were welcomed? A 20-rupee ride took him to a narrow lane that housed the institution. Houses on either side stuck to each other for want of space. Protruding verandas acted like a canopy that blocked out most of the sunlight. The orphanage itself was a sorry-looking building. Painted a pink that had gone from dark to dirty in the last few decades, it was a typical two-storied Rajasthani house with a hand-painted signboard above the small main door that read, Sri Hindu Anatha Ashram, established 1925. Only his religious father would pick a Hindu-only orphanage for adoption, he thought, already irritated. He cowered in through the main gate. In place of boisterous children running about, what greeted him was the smell of bodily waste. Any romantic notions he may have harbored about his birth parents flew right out of the window. A makeshift chair and table sat in the middle of the open courtyard. A mustached man perched on it with his feet atop the desk. He was cleaning his left ear with a feather, his face scrunched up in pleasure. Sanjeev stood there, unsure. Speaking now felt like a violation of privacy. The man opened his eyes and jumped out of his seat. Welcome to Hindu Orphanage, sir. I myself, Ajay Rathore. Private tour, 200 rupees. With camera, 500 specially for you, he said breathlessly. मैं Indian हूँ यार, Sanjeev confirmed. Did he even look like a tourist? Ajay didn't even hide his disappointment. Only foreigners visiting translated to money. Indians were good-for-nothing fools, always asking for favors in the name of brotherhood. I need some help, Sanjeev said on cue. Ajay plopped down on the chair, uninterested. I knew it, written all over his face. I need to speak to someone, Sanjeev implored, sliding a 50-rupee note towards him. Ajay folded the note in two and put it in his breast pocket. Please sit, sir, he offered. Sanjeev cut to the chase. I have a letter for the person who used to run the orphanage 44 years ago. This is hardly an orphanage now, sir. Only tourists come for picture clicking. No donation, no orphan. He shrugged. Do you have any old records I can see? Files, pictures? Nah, we sold them a long time ago. Without any other option, Sanjeev fished out his father's letter. He handed it over to Ajay. My father wrote this letter in the year that I was born. For some reason, he never posted it. Arey, then open it na, sir. It's your property. Maybe you'll find an answer. With some deliberation, Sanjeev held the letter to light and tore the envelope open carefully. A faded black and white picture fell into his lap. Although damaged, he could make out a young couple standing at the gate of the orphanage, holding a baby in their arms. He could see the exact spot from where he was sitting. Can I have a glass of water? He asked. His throat seemed to be closing in. Ajay got up reluctantly. Sanjeev unfolded the letter. It read, Dear Head of Hindu Orphanage, you may not know me, but I have been toying with the idea of writing to you for years. My son was born last week. We have named him Sanjeev. In many ways, he has, true to his name, brought me back to life. His birth, no less than a miracle, has brought us abundant joy. In fatherhood, I have realized the importance of one's own roots. Thus, I am writing to you to find my own birth parents. I am enclosing a picture my mother gave me recently. They had adopted me from your orphanage a little after the partition. I am attaching the old form that confirms this. Many may call this inquisitiveness a midlife crisis. But I simply must understand where I came from to be a good father to Sanjeev and give him a childhood that isn't clouded with so many questions. Please help with whatever information you may have. Regards, Balakrishna Hegde. Sir, Pani, Ajay offered. With shaking hands, Sanjeev accepted it. He never would have guessed his father, like him, was looking for answers he never got. Maybe never having found about his own past made him hesitant, distant, and aloof. Maybe, Sanjeev reasoned, the things that make us feel weak and alone are also the things that make us human. He finally understood, unlike the others he had met on this journey, why was it so difficult for him to express the things that weighed heavily on his heart. This was his inheritance. In a strange way, he felt closer to his father than he had before. Did you like our orphanage, sir? Ajay called out as he got up to leave. I'd give it 5 stars, said Sanjeev, smiling with his eyes.
The sepia blue beauty of the vintage aerogram took her breath away. Amaya's fingers slowly traced Ajit's round lettering with the traditional Eastern curlicues, redolent of her own mother's Pali-like script. His departure that June morning years ago still stung. Amaya was not ready to read Ajit's letter. Yet. She chucked it into the kitchen drawer. It was the ending of the fall semester. Between her teaching and patiently, she had to keep her wits about her. Resurrecting a ghost from another lifetime had to wait. Amaya made a mental note to send a thank you to Sanjeev for forwarding the letter. She wondered what Ajit could have possibly offered as an explanation for his disappearance. A glance at her watch set her dashing out the door for her 10 a.m. seminar at Northwestern. En route to the university, Amaya's mind drifted to those last days with Ajit. Their customary laughter-filled exchanges and good-natured verbal sparring were replaced by a wall of tension between the young graduates. Each assiduously avoided the topic of his impending departure. Amaya wondered how the memory of Ajit's goodbye could still create an ache in the pit of her stomach. She wished she had not received the aerogram. A tax collection letter from the Internal Revenue Service would have been far more welcome. Later that week, while preparing the Christmas menu, Maya dumped the contents of the kitchen drawer onto the table in search of her mother's kitty bath recipe. Sifting through the slips of paper, recipes, straws, and chopsticks, she caught a glimpse of the blue letter peeking from under the pile. Sighing, she grabbed it and stuffed it into the back pocket of her jeans. The aerogram felt like a time bomb strapped to her person, ticking away, counting down to 0. She wondered about the words that waited, ready to detonate. She worried about the collateral damage it might wreak on the fragile memories that Ajit and she had created many moons ago. A first love is precious. You'd protect it at all costs. The appearance of the letter threatened their story. Christmas had always made Amaya feel blue. The last thing she needed was a double dose of nostalgia and regret. She slipped the letter into the nightstand and promised herself that she would read it after the holidays. As the last guest left, Amaya daydreamed about her hopes for the new year. She reached for the notepad in her bedside drawer and touched the letter. It burned her hand. She could ignore it no longer. Feeling rather foolish for allowing a phantom to haunt her, Amaya scribbled a long overdue thank you note to Sanjeev. With the holidays behind him, Sanjeev enjoyed a late sleep. Over a leisurely breakfast, he called to check on his amma, then retrieved the day's post. A thick blue envelope fell to the floor. It was from the woman in Chicago. 1st January 2020. Dear Sanjeev, thank you for sending Ajit's letter. It brought memories of our graduate school days together. We met in the clinical psychology program at the University of Chicago and shared heated discussions and endless debates, agreeing on almost nothing. Halcyon days. He returned to Kerala immediately after graduation. I heard no more from Ajit. He just vanished, as though we were never friends. Have you ever experienced someone close to you dropping out of your life with no explanation, Sanjeev? These days I believed it's called ghosting. It crushes the soul. Seeing his handwriting once more stirred up old feelings. Not all good. Sanjeev, I'm sorry you went to such a bother. I didn't read the letter. I couldn't. There'd be no point. Ghosts belong to the past. I'm returning the letter to you. Some things are better left unsaid. Sincerely, Amaya. P.S. This letter belongs to Ajit, not to me. Disgusted, Sanjeev dropped the letter into the bin. Removing Ajit's aerogram from the envelope, he walked to the veranda for a smoke, still bristling from the iciness of Amaya's sterile explanation. Her disinterest in the letter and indifference to Ajit's side of the story split open his own emotional wounds. Poor fellow, Sanjeev muttered, feeling a kindred spirit with Ajit. This Amaya probably didn't even deserve him. She reminded Sanjeev of the women with whom he had developed attachments to over the years, only to be interminably disappointed. Amaya's pride struck a resonant chord in Sanjeev. Her response mirrored his own rigidity, which prematurely truncated his relationship with Divya. Decades earlier, his ego had prevented him from pursuing the lovely Amrita. It was he who lacked the capacity to sustain relationships of any kind. Even with his own beloved Amma, he realized that he had erected a divide. His indifference served as a cloak for the insecurities that plagued him, reflecting his own father's struggle to love. The apple had not fallen far from the tree. Like Atha, he too had mastered the art of masking his fears, shrouding them in steel. He had to. It was necessary for survival. As a child, Sanjeev had built an interior fortress to shield him from Appa's constant criticism. The wall was useful in other ways. It allowed him to advance professionally in his competitive field. Only the carefully constructed citadel served also as his prison, separating him from those he loved. A text from Amma shook Sanjeev out of his reverie. Ajit's letter still in hand, he realized that he had constructed a story about a woman he didn't even know. Amaya clearly had a reason for not reading the aerogram. Who was he to judge? He remembered his mother's words. Every story has two sides. Forwarding the letter to Ajit could stir up a hornet's nest of emotions for the old man. Sanjeev was not willing to chance it. Extracting the Marlboro from his lips, he touched the cigarette to the corner of the letter. As the flame devoured the paper, transforming it into ash, Sanjeev was in agreement. Some things are definitely better left unsaid.
Sanjeev was astonished seeing the crowd at Howrah station. As the train chugged slowly into the platform, he looked out of the window. His co-passengers craned their necks to find their loved ones eagerly waiting for their arrival. Sanjeev's life had taken new dimensions in the past few months. He was still trying to identify with this new Sanjeev and comprehend his emotions. Living alone had taught him to be immune to people's feelings. Sanjeev had built invisible walls around him which kept everyone at bay. He wasn't ready to go home and face his mother yet. Calcutta had its own charm and pace. He would probably stay here for a while, just like his father, or perhaps go to Banaras from here or Darjeeling to see the mountains and watch the sunrise from Tiger Hills. For now, Sanjeev boarded a black and yellow taxi to go to 1/2 Ratan Babu Road, Kosipur, to deliver the last letter from his bag to Srimati Bijaya Chattopadhyay. The driver told him that the address was very close to the banks of the river Ganges. Many people dip in the holy Ganges to wash their sins and purify their body and soul. Sanjeev wondered if there was any element of truth behind this age-old superstition, while the taxiwala pointed to historical places on the way, chattering incessantly about the city's cultural heritage. Sanjeev knocked on the door of a crumbling 4-story house of exposed bricks. The paint had peeled off and the cracks were filled with moss, making it exquisitely beautiful. An old lady, dressed in white, peeped from behind the green shutters and asked loudly, "K?" The lady had the kindest eyes he had ever seen and a beautiful smile. Her face was wrinkled like parchment. She was probably in her mid-80s, he thought. Sanjeev fumbled in his bag for the envelope and handed it over. The woman glanced at the handwriting for a few minutes. Then tears began rolling down her eyes. "Eta to Oruner hater lekha," she cried. "Chichita kothay pele baba?" she inquired. Sanjeev didn't understand what she said, but there was something about her which stirred in him a cascade of emotions. Was it the human touch? When was the last time someone had touched him? As he entered, a window opened to the right of the entrance. A teenager looked at him with furrowed eyebrows. "Ke esheche Pishima?" the boy inquired. He conversed with the old lady in fluent Bengali for a few minutes. Sanjeev decided to call her Pishima too, which he later learnt meant father's sister. The boy donned the role of a translator. He told Sanjeev to freshen up while Pishima brought rasgullas made with jaggery, a winter speciality, along with a glass of water. She made him a cup of tea and served him rusk biscuits. In the living area, Sanjeev saw 2 photographs hanging on the wall. One, an old man with a receding hairline, wearing large spectacles with black frames. The other, a young army officer who looked exactly like Pishima. Sanjeev's curiosity was piqued. Sanjeev learned from the boy that Pishima's husband, Dr. A.N. Chattopadhyay, was a famous doctor who treated the poor for free. The day he passed away, 28 years ago, all the shops in the neighborhood were closed as a token of respect. Pishima's only son passed away a few years after that, a martyr who laid down his life in the Kargil War. Pishima's daughter was married to a scientist and had requested her to live with them in Bangalore, but Pishima was adamant that she would live alone and serve the people just like her doctor husband and martyr son. Pishima opened the envelope with moist eyes and trembling hands. A rolled parchment, yellowed with time, tumbled out, along with a few pictures of a young man standing against snow-clad mountains. Gulmarg, March 1999. Pishima read the Bengali script. "This was just before the war broke out," she whispered. The parchment in the envelope was a property deed of a piece of land which Pishima's brother-in-law had tried snatching away from her. In the letter, Arun had mentioned that he had noticed his paternal uncle stealthily searching the cupboards for this document after his father's sudden demise. Arun, therefore, had hidden the property deed all these years so that his uncle would not misuse it. He was sending the deed now, after the hue and cry about the missing papers had died down, so that his mother could sell the plot and use the money to build a clinic for the poor. Pishima traced her wrinkled fingers on the writing again and again. She looked at her son's photograph. He was smiling back at her. She kissed Arun's photograph, held it close to her heart. He had mentioned that in a few months' time he would be transferred and would live with his mother at the army quarters. He would take her on pilgrimages, Dwarka, Haridwar, Benares, Rameshwaram. Sanjeev held Pishima's fragile hands. He could feel the pain of losing a loved one, his emotions still raw. He knew that he was traveling to run away from reality, afraid to face his mother for not going home when his parents needed him the most. Pishima took out a faded picture album and showed pictures of Arun's childhood, recollecting fond memories in Bengali. Sanjeev did not need the boy to translate the pain of crushed dreams and lost hopes. Is this the price the family of army men pay? He wondered. Pishima's son could have chosen to be an engineer, just like me. Sanjeev shuddered at the thought. Sanjeev did not have the heart to tell Pishima that his father had kept this letter away in his trunk. Nor could he say no when Pishima invited him to stay for lunch and cooked a simple meal of rice, dal, aloo posto and mochar ghonto, an exquisite side dish made with the flowers of a banana plant. It was her son's favorite. When she learned that Sanjeev would live in a hotel, she insisted he stays with her for a few days. Under normal circumstances, Sanjeev would have refused, but he couldn't say no to Pishima. A week later, Pishima came to drop Sanjeev at the railway station. She gave him a maroon hand-knit sweater. I had knitted it for Arun. I did not get a chance to give it to him, son, but I will be very happy if you wear it, she requested in Bengali. Pishima had packed lots of homemade sweets and food to last him for the next 2 days. She had packed another bag of sweets for her granddaughter living in Bangalore. Perhaps Pishima saw her son in Sanjeev, and Sanjeev found the love and affection he always craved for. In that old house, Sanjeev had begun rediscovering himself. Sanjeev, who had thought that he did not know how to love, found that Pishima had shown him how to love unconditionally. Sanjeev had found new and profound meaning in relationships in the last few months. Love, strong enough to melt down the invisible walls he had built around him. Love, powerful enough to bury the hatred and misunderstandings that he had harbored in his heart for all these years. Love, an emotion that is not restricted by man-made geographical boundaries, distinguishing languages and different religions. Love, an emotion that could be expressed even without uttering words. As the train passed through the countryside, Sanjeev looked at the farmers toiling on their paddy fields, ploughing hard to make their lands more fertile. He had ample time to think about how he would pick up the broken pieces of his relationships and mend them to build a fortress of love.
Hello, my name is Meenakshi Thakur and I work at Westland Publications as the publisher of Eka, an imprint that publishes original writing and translations in 8 Indian languages and English. Today you'll be meeting a writer whose books I edit. I consider myself fortunate that I got the opportunity to work with him. His name is Manoranjan Byapari. He writes in Bengali. You'll be meeting a rare writer. He writes about experiences that he's lived. He writes about his life, rather the many lives he's led. He's published 26 books in Bengali. He wrote his first one at the age of 50, and at the age of 24, he taught himself to read and write while he was in jail. Byapari was born in the mid-50s in Barishal, former East Pakistan. His family migrated to West Bengal in India when he was 3. They were resettled in Bankura at the Shiromanipur refugee camp, and later they were forced to shift to another camp in 24 Parganas, Bengal. They lived there till 1969. At the age of 14, Byapari had to leave. He ran away to do odd jobs. He worked at roadside dhabas, washing dishes, washing glasses, doing the dishes. He worked as a sweeper, a porter, a laborer, a shop assistant. In his early 20s, he came into contact with Naxalites and with the famous labor activist Shankar Guha Yogi, who was the founder of Chhattisgarh Mukti Morcha at the Dalli Rajhara mines. The Naxalites were then leading a revolution to reclaim lands of the tribals from feudal lords who had captured them by unfair means. Byapari was sent to jail during this time. He was about 23 or 24 then. It is there that he taught himself to read and write. And he got addicted to books over there. He read one book after another and another one after that. And this way he read many, many books from the jail library. When he came out of jail, he became a rickshaw puller in Kolkata. Between rides, when he would be parked by the roadside, he would read books. He would keep books under the seat, the passenger seat, and he would read them whenever he would be free. One of those days, he was standing outside a college and a lady stepped out. He thought she was a teacher from the college. She boarded his rickshaw and he was confused about the meaning of a word which was in a book that he was reading then. So he asked this lady, Byapari will tell you about this word later on, but he asked this lady what the meaning of the word was. And the lady in the passenger seat was quite surprised that someone like him knew this word. So she asked him, what book did you find that word in? So Byapari said Mahashweta Devi's book. As it happens, that passenger was Mahashweta Devi herself, the great Bengali writer. And she got curious and she asked him about his life. And then she said she ran a journal called Bartika where people like him wrote. And she said, why don't you write a piece about your life? I publish people like you. Byapari wasn't sure, but he ended up writing a piece, and then he never looked back. He's written 26 books since. He has published 12 novels, over 70 short stories. Some of his important works include, and I'll tell you the Bangla titles, Chera Chera Jibon, Motua Ak Mukti Senar Naam, Itibrite Chandal Jibon, which is his memoir, and the Chandal Jibon trilogy of novels. Until 2018, interestingly, while being a writer full-time, he was working as a cook at the Helen Keller Institute for the Deaf and the Blind in West Bengal. In 2018, the English translation of his memoir, Itibrite Chandal Jibon, which translates to Interrogating My Chandal Life, it received the Hindu Prize for Non-Fiction. Westland published a translation of his novel. It's called There's Gunpowder in the Air. We published it in 2018, and in 2019 it was shortlisted for the JCB Prize for Literature, the Crossword Book Award for Best Translation, the DSC Prize for South Asian Literature, and the Mathrubhumi Book of the Year Award. Two more of his novels have been translated into English by us. The first one is The Runaway Boy, which is actually the first in a trilogy of novels. The trilogy is Chandal Jibon trilogy. It tells the story of a Shudra boy, a Chandal boy named Jiban. Chandals are a community of people who burn bodies at cremation grounds. So Jiban, this boy, Chandal boy, he arrives in Bengal from East Pakistan in a lorry with his parents and many other Hindus fleeing from religious persecution in East Pakistan. The living conditions in the refugee camps that they are settled in are deplorable. And at the age of 12 or 13, Jiban decides to run away. He runs away from home because he's heard from people that in Calcutta, money flies in the air on the streets. And his young and naive mind tells him that if he goes there, he'll be able to catch some money and buy 2 sets of clothes, 2 sets of saris for his mother, some medicine for his father, and some food for his younger siblings. He runs away, and the novel describes his adventures and misadventures once he crosses the safe boundaries of his home. This is a seminal work, the Chandal Jibon trilogy. It is a seminal work not only because it is a work of Dalit literature by a Dalit writer, but also because it is a vivid and astute portrayal of newly independent India. The next novel that we've recently published, it released last week in fact, it's called Iman. It is quite different from The Runaway Boy. It tells the story of a boy named Iman who goes to prison as an infant in the arms of his mother, who's charged with the murder of his father. The mother dies a few years later, but Iman continues to stay there for 20 more years. When he's released, he's not familiar with the world outside. He doesn't know how the free world functions. So the novel makes him a witness to the doings of those who occupy the free world. 2 of his novels have appeared in Malayalam. The Chandal Jibon trilogy will be released in Hindi next year. 3 more English translations are in the pipeline. 2 of them will be published in the US by an independent publisher called Anti-Books Club. These will be released in the spring of 2022. The Chandal Jibon trilogy will also be translated into French next year. Byapari is a darling of literature festivals. He's a charming speaker. He knows how to keep his audience enthralled. He makes you laugh. He makes you angry and disturbed. He also makes you emotional at the same time. He says the pen is his sword. He says he writes because he cannot kill. His books are a social commentary, but they're also examples of fine storytelling. He's a brilliant, extraordinary storyteller. He has a very sharp wit. His books have dark humor. He talks about atrocities, inequities of all kinds, untouchability, but he never overlooks the beauty inherent in ordinary moments of ordinary lives, in the lives of ordinary people. I think that's what makes him a really fine, complete writer. Manoranjan Byapari has come a long way, changing many avatars, from a young refugee to a house help, a sweeper, a Naxalite, a rickshaw puller, a cook, a librarian, a writer, a social activist, and now a newly elected member of the Bengal Legislative Assembly. He had a landslide victory in the Balaghar constituency, where he contested as a TMC candidate. With this, I leave you with him. I'm sure you'll enjoy his talk. Please ask him lots of questions if you have the chance to. He is someone whom everyone who wants to write or who is an avid reader should get to know. Thank you.
मेरे से अगर पूछा जाए और ये कहा जाए कि 1 मिनट में आप अपना परिचय बताएं, तो मैं इतना बताऊंगा कि मैं एक मेहनतकश लिखवाड़, इसके अलावा मेरा और कोई परिचय नहीं है। राजनीति कर रहा हूँ, लेकिन सबसे पहले मैं एक लिखवाड़ ही मानता हूँ अपने को। मेरा बचपन, मैं उस समय के बारे में अगर बताना चाहूँ तो वो बड़ा दुखद था। देश के बंटवारा के कारण हमारे पिताजी को ऊपर बंगाल से इस पार आना पड़ा था और उन्होंने दंडकारण में जाने से इनकार कर दिया था। इसके लिए जो कि सरकारी जो भी सहायता वो हम सबको मिला नहीं, तो उसके लिए बचपन हमारा बहुत इतना भयानक और दुखदायक था, खाना नसीब नहीं होता था। छोटे सी उम्र में जब बच्चे लोग स्कूल जाया करते हैं, उसी उम्र में हमें गैया बैला चराने के लिए जाना पड़ा था। तो लोगों के घर में वो सब काम करके हमने बड़े हुए, और उस समय हम इतना छोटे थे कि भारत, इंडिया, इनके बारे में उतना हमारा जानकारी था नहीं। लेकिन हमने देखा लाखों करोड़ों लोग जो आज़ादी के चलते देश की बंटवारा के कारण बिखर गए, वो अपना देश गवा बैठे। तो ये स्थिति हमने वो तो उस समय देखा, रोते हुए लाखों करोड़ों लोगों को जो आज़ादी का जश्न नहीं मना पाए। मैंने कभी स्कूल नहीं गया, ये बात सत्य है, लेकिन जेल गया। और एक बहुत बड़े लीडर उन्होंने कहा कि गए कि जेल दुनिया का सबसे बड़ा विश्वविद्यालय है। तो वही जेल में हमें एक आदमी मिल गया था। उन्होंने कहा लंबे समय तेरे को जेल में बिताना पड़ेगा, इस समय को तू मत गवा। बाहर में तेरा खाना नहीं मिलता था, यहाँ मिल रहा। बाहर में रहने का मकान नहीं मिलता था, यहाँ है। बीमार हो जाता तो दवा दारू नहीं मिलता, यहाँ मिलेगा। ठंडे में तेरे को कंबल मिलेगा, सब कुछ ही मिल जाएगा थोड़े थोड़े, तो ये समय को तू मत गवा और लिखा पढ़े सीख। तो और भी कई घटना हुआ था जो बोलने जाएंगे तो हमारे टाइम परमिट नहीं करेगा, तो हमको भी लगा कि हाँ ठीक है थोड़ा सीख लिया जाए। तो जेल में हमें लिखाई पढ़ी सीखने का मौका मिला। एक लाकड़ी का कुटका, उसी से मिट्टी में ज़मीन में और लिख लिख के हमने लिखने को सीखा। जब जेल से बाहर आए तो हमें पुस्तक पढ़ने का एक आदत लग गया था। बहुत सारी पुस्तक पढ़ते थे। वो पुस्तक पढ़ते पढ़ते एक शब्द हमें मिला था जिजीविषा, जिसका अर्थ हमें मालूम नहीं था। तो जिसको जिसको मिल रहा था उससे हम पूछ रहे थे। उस समय हम रिक्शा चलाया करते थे। हमारे रिक्शा में एक सवारी 4 बैठे, उनसे हमने ये सवाल पूछा तो वो चौंक गए कि एक रिक्शा वाला इन शब्द को उसको मिला कहाँ से और इसको अर्थ जानने का इतना बेतलब क्या क्यों है। तब उन्होंने हमें पूछा कि तुम्हारा लिखाई पढ़ी कितना दूर। हमने कहा हम लिखाई पढ़ी नहीं जानते। ये शब्द तुम्हें कहाँ से मिला? हमने कहा पुस्तक से मिला। तो तुम लिखाई पढ़ी नहीं जानते, तुम कैसे पढ़ लेते हो? हमने कहा ऐसे ही हम खुद सीखे। तब उन्होंने कहा कि हमारा एक पत्रिका निकलता है, वर्तिका उसका नाम है, उसमें तुम लिखोगे तुम्हारा आत्मकथा। तब उन्होंने एक उनका एड्रेस जो है छोटा सा कागज़ में लिख के दिया। तब हम जान पाए कि ये है महाश्वेता देवी, उस समय का बहुत मशहूर साहित्यकार। तो वही जो लेख हमने लिखा था उसके माध्यम से हमारे लेखन के क्षेत्र में आना पड़ा। वो लेख लोगों ने बहुत पसंद किया था और उसके कारण जो है लोग फिर मांगने लगे हमसे लेख कि भाई इस विषय पर लिखो, उस विषय पर लिखो। तो लिखते लिखते यहाँ तक आ पहुँचा हूँ। कई बड़े बड़े पुरस्कार भी मिले, एकेडमी पुरस्कार, रविंद्र पुरस्कार, दी हिंदू पुरस्कार, रूसो फेलोशिप जर्मनी से वो भी मिले और भी बहुत सारे मिले। मैं 4 साहित्यिक को अपना आदर्श मानता हूँ, उसी को मैं फॉलो करता हूँ। एक तो महाश्वेता देवी हुए। महाश्वेता देवी का जो क्रोध वो हमें बहुत पसंद है। मेरे ख्याल से हर साहित्यिक को जिनमें समाज चेतना है, महाश्वेता देवी जैसा क्रोधी होना ही पड़ेगा, होना ही चाहिए। जब देश के आम लोगों को, गरीब लोगों के प्रति आपका प्यार होगा तो आपको उन गरीबों का जो दुश्मन है उसके विरुद्ध में आपका क्रोध जायज़ है, स्वाभाविक है। महाश्वेता देवी का वो क्रोध, उसमें से हमने भी कुछ सीखा। दूसरा है समरेश बसु, जिनका लेखन से हमने ये देखा कि हर कैरेक्टर को उन्होंने इतना प्यार से, इतना जतन से, मोहब्बत से तैयार किया। तो उनका हृदय जो है हर कैरेक्टर के साथ जो एकदम घुल मिल गया, वो हमें पसंद है बहुत। हम उससे भी सीखने का प्रयास करता हूँ। और जाजावर नाम का एक साहित्यिक है जिनका दृष्टिपात उपन्यास है। एक शब्द को दूसरे शब्दों के साथ माला, जैसे फूल को धागा में पिरोया जाता, उस तरह इतना सुंदरता के साथ पिरोया है जो वो उससे हमने भी कुछ सीखा। और जो 4 नंबर जो है वो है हिंदी का साहित्यकार श्रीलाल शुक्ला। उनका राग दरबारी हमने पढ़ा। हर चीज़ों को देखने के लिए जो एक तिर्यक नज़रिया, व्यंग्यात्मक एक नज़रिया, उससे भी हमने कुछ सीखा। तो ये चारों को मैं आदर्श मानता हूँ और उनसे कुछ कुछ सीख के और अपना जो अनुभव है इसके माध्यम से हमने अब तक जो भी लिखा यही कारण से लिख पाए। और एक सवाल और भी है कि मैं अगर कोई उपन्यास औरों का जो लिखा हुआ है अभी हमें अगर लिखने का मौका दिया जाता तो हम दोबारा लिखते, तो वो है पद्मा नदीर माझी। मानिक बंदोपाध्याय ने उस उपन्यास मछुआरे का जीवन का ऊपर में लिखा। लेकिन उसमें एक भी कैरेक्टर ऐसा नहीं है जो निम्न वर्ण लोगों को मर्यादा सम्मान जो है बढ़ाने को काम करता है। उसमें एक कैरेक्टर है केंद्रीय चरित्र जो है कुबेर, उसको ऊपर में चोरी का इल्ज़ाम डाला गया और डर के मारे भाग जाता है। हम अगर लिखें तो वो उपन्यास में हमारा जो कैरेक्टर वो भागेगा नहीं, क्योंकि उन्होंने तो चोरी किया नहीं, तो फिर भागेगा क्यों? वो उसी मिट्टी में खड़े होकर के लड़ेंगे और जीतेंगे। There is a gunpowder in the बांग्ला में जिसका नाम था बातासे बारूदेर गंध। ये जो कैरेक्टर है जिनके ऊपर इस उपन्यास आधारित है, इन सब को हमने जेल में देखा। तो इसमें सच्चाई, सभी सच्चाई ही है, लेकिन एक उपन्यास जो है लिखने के लिए थोड़ा से अलंकार, उदाहरण, उपमा इसका प्रयोग किया जाता, उतना हमने लिया उपन्यास का लिखने के लिए, लेकिन बाकी सब बात जो है वो सच्चाई है। जो भी राइटर जो कहानी लिखते हैं, उपन्यास लिखते हैं, सब कहानी, सब उपन्यास में कहीं ना कहीं उस राइटर भी उपस्थित रहता है। मेरे जो उपन्यास जो अभी रानो बॉय और बांग्ला में जो घर पालन चले, ये सब नाम में आया है, और इसमें जीवन नाम का जो कैरेक्टर है उसमें उस जीवन में मेरा भी जीवन समाया हुआ है। अब कितना समाया हुआ है ये तो पाठक जो है वो ढूंढ के निकालेंगे, ये उनका जिम्मेदारी है। जितना वो सच्चा मानेगा उतना सच्चा, जितना वो कहानी मानेगा उतना कहानी। ईमान जो उपन्यास मेरा है वो बांग्ला में नाम था छेड़ा छेड़ा जीवन। तो उस उपन्यास में जो ईमान नाम का जो लड़का है उसको तो नहीं, उसके जैसा एक लड़के को हमने जेल में देखा, और उस ईमान जैसे बहुत सारे लड़के को हमने रास्ते में बाहर में देखा। तो सबको जोड़ जोड़ के एक उपन्यास हमने तैयार किया, और जिसका केंद्रीय चरित्र जो है, मुख्य चरित्र जो है वो है ईमान। ईमान एक ऐसा व्यक्ति है जो बाहरी दुनिया वो देखा नहीं, वो जेल में ही बचपन से जेल में रहा, और बड़े होकर के जब जेल से बाहर निकले तो वो देखा कि अच्छे लोग जो है वो जेल में ज़्यादा रहते हैं, और बाहर में ज़्यादा लोगों की तादाद बहुत ज़्यादा है। एक समय वो फिर वापस जेल जाने का प्रयास करता है, लेकिन जेल में तो बेकसूर लोगों को रखा नहीं जाता, इसके लिए वो कामयाब हो नहीं पाता। तो ये एक उपन्यास इस तरह है मेरा। पहले मैं एक राइटर था, अब मैं एमएलए बन गया हूँ। पहले मैं लोगों का दुख दर्द सुनता था और उसके बारे में लिखता था। पुस्तक छप जाता था, बिक्री होता था, उसका रॉयल्टी हमें मिलता था। फायदे जो कुछ होता था हमारा ही होता था, उन दुखी लोगों को कुछ नहीं होता था। लेकिन अभी एमएलए बनने के बाद अब कुछ लोगों को जो है दुख दर्द जो है दूर करने के लिए हम कुछ कदम तो उठा ही पा रहे हैं। और दूसरी बात यह है, अगर राइटर लोग राजनीति में कूद पड़े, एमएलए बन जाए, तो सरकार के ऊपर में आंगली कौन उठाएगा, सरकार की गलतियाँ को कौन सुधारने के लिए सलाह देगा। हम इतना मानते हैं कि राजनीति में आए अगर वो सच्चे आदमी हो, ईमानदार आदमी हो, तो उस काम को कर सकता है, इसके लिए कोई रुकावट नहीं। लेकिन वो तब नहीं कर पाएगा जब वो खुद बुरे आदमी होंगे, धंधाबाज लोग होंगे, तो कर नहीं सकते। लेकिन सच्चे दिल से, तहे दिल से आदमी का हित के लिए सरकार की गलतियाँ आप उसको अंगली उठा करके दिखाए कि सरकार आपको ये जगह गलती हो रहा है, आप इसको सुधार लीजिए, तो किया जा सकता, इसमें कोई रुकावट नहीं है। मैं रिक्शा चलाया करता था, मुटिया था, डोम था, स्वीपर था, वगैरह वगैरह बहुत कुछ था, रसोइया भी था। इसके बीच में लिखने के लिए समय निकालना बड़ी मुश्किल था। कैसे हमने लिख डाला इतना उपन्यास, अभी भी हम दुविधा में पड़ जाते हैं, सोच में पड़ जाते हैं। तो मैं एक चीज़ किया करते थे कि जो भी प्लॉट मेरे एक बार मन में आ जाए कि उस पर लिखना चाहिए, तो सब कम छोड़ करके मैं उसी के पीछे पड़ा रहा, और जब तक वो लेख समाप्त ना हो जाए हम और कहीं नहीं जाते थे। ये रिक्शा चलाने का समय भी हो, मुटिया मजदूरी, इसके लिए हमको बहुत सारे कष्ट और तकलीफ को झेलना पड़ा, क्योंकि हम लिखते रह गए तो घर में तो चाल दाल का समस्या आ गया था। लेकिन जब हम कोई जो अमानुषिक हमारा जो उपन्यास है वो सिर्फ 4 दिन में हम लिख डाले थे, ना नहाए ना रात को सोए, 4 दिन में वो उपन्यास को ख़त्म किया था। तो इसी तरह हम लिखते रहे और लिखते लिखते, लेकिन कोई हमारा ऐसा कोई रूटीन नहीं है कि सुबह लिखेंगे शाम को लिखेंगे। रात को नींद खुल गया 2 बजे लिखने को बैठ गया, सुबह काम में जाना है, फिर मन में कोई कहानी आ गया तो काम में गया ही नहीं, बढ़िया लिखने। ऐसे हम लिखते रहे। नए जो लोग लिखने का क्षेत्र में आ रहे हैं, पहले तो हम उनको ये कहेंगे कि ईमानदारी के साथ, साहस के साथ आपको लिखना पड़ेगा, और लिख करके हमें बहुत सारी पैसा मिल जाएगा, पैसे के लिए मैं लिख रहा हूँ, ये सोच के आप लेखन के क्षेत्र में आओगे तो आप कुछ नहीं कर सकते। सिर्फ लेखन से आपको प्यार हो जाए, एक सृजनशीलता के प्रति आपके प्यार हो जाए, तो आप उसको कर सकते हो। लेकिन सच्चे दिल से, तहे दिल से, ईमानदारी के साथ अगर आप लिखो तो आज नहीं तो कल लोग उसको पसंद करेंगे। और आप सिर्फ नाम कमाने के लिए सोचते हो कि हम मोटे मोटे उपन्यास लिख डालेंगे, लिखोगे ज़रूर आप, लेकिन वो कोई पढ़ेगा नहीं। जो भी आप लिखोगे उसके साथ सच्चाई होना चाहिए, साहस होना चाहिए, और लोगों के प्रति जिन कैरेक्टर को आप निर्माण कर रहे हो उनके प्रति भी आपको गहरी प्यार होना चाहिए। यदि अगर ये हो जाए तो आपका लेखन जो है वो लोगों को पसंद आएगा।